On Christmas Day, 1991, the iconic red flag of the Soviet Union was lowered over the Kremlin for the very last time. That same evening, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned as president of a country that for all practical purposes no longer existed. The Soviet Union was formally dissolved the very next day, on December 26th. But this final historic moment wasn't caused by a war or a revolution in Moscow. The fatal blow wasn't even struck in the halls of the Kremlin. It was delivered weeks earlier by millions of ordinary people in a quiet, democratic act of defiance. This is the story of the vote that would kill the Soviet Union, and how one nation's choice for freedom erased an empire from the map. By 1991, the USSR was a giant on its last legs. The whole Soviet machine was grinding to a halt. Decades of economic rot had led to widespread shortages, and the political glue holding 15 different republics together was failing. Mikhail Gorbachev's famous reforms, glasnost and perestroika, had opened the door to dissent. But they hadn't fixed the fundamentally broken system. The final proof of Moscow's weakness came in August 1991. A group of communist hardliners, desperate to turn back the clock, launched a coup against Gorbachev. For 3 days, the world held its breath, fearing a return to the darkest days of Soviet power. But the coup spectacularly failed, collapsing in the face of massive protests led by Boris Yeltsin in Moscow. The failure of the coup shattered what little authority the central government had left. Like a dam breaking, republics that had been asking for more autonomy now saw their chance for a full break. The Baltic states were already on their way out, but for the Union to truly die, one republic, more than any other, had to leave, and that republic was Ukraine. For centuries, Ukraine existed at the heart of empires, its culture and language often suppressed. Inside the USSR, it was widely seen as the second most important of the 15 republics, right after Russia. With 52 million people, a massive industrial base, and rich farmland, Ukraine wasn't just another piece of the puzzle, it was the cornerstone. Gorbachev himself said he couldn't imagine a union without Ukraine. And to make things even more complicated, Ukraine had inherited a massive portion of the Soviet nuclear arsenal. For a brief, strange moment, an independent Ukraine would become the third largest nuclear power on the planet. In the chaos after the failed August coup, Ukraine's parliament, the Verkhovna Rada, seized its chance. On August 24, 1991, after a tense, all-night session, they passed the Act of Declaration of Independence. It was a bold, historic move. But a declaration from politicians wasn't enough. To make independence an undeniable reality, the decision had to be made by the people. The parliament called for a nationwide referendum to be held on December 1st, 1991. The question was simple. Do you confirm the Act of Declaration of Independence of Ukraine? As December 1st dawned, a nervous energy gripped the nation. The presidential candidates, including the frontrunner and former communist boss Leonid Kravchuk, all campaigned for a yes vote. International journalists descended on Kyiv, sensing that the fate of a superpower was about to be decided. In kitchens in Lviv, in the fiercely nationalist West, families prayed for freedom. In the industrial heartland of the Donbass, miners debated what a break from Russia would mean for their jobs. Even Soviet soldiers on military bases were allowed to vote, facing a choice that would redefine their allegiance. Throughout the day, people turned out in staggering numbers. By the time polls closed, an incredible 84% of the electorate had participated. This wasn't just an election, it was a national mobilization. As the sun set, the anxious wait for results began. The results, when they started to trickle in, were beyond anyone's most optimistic predictions. The early numbers from Western Ukraine were, as expected, nearly unanimous. But the real question was the East and South, regions with deep cultural and economic ties to Russia. Then those results came in. Donetsk, 83.9%. Yes. Luhansk, 83.8%. Yes. Odessa, 85.4%. Yes. Even in Crimea, with its majority ethnic Russian population, a surprising 54% voted for an independent Ukraine. Nationally, the final tally was a political earthquake. An astonishing 92.3% of voters had said yes to independence. This wasn't a narrow victory. It was a unified, democratic roar from over 28 million people choosing to create their own country. The result made Mikhail Gorbachev's plans for a new union of sovereign states instantly obsolete. How could there be a union when its second most important member had just so decisively walked away? The world, which had been watching cautiously, reacted with stunning speed. On December 2nd, Poland and Canada became the first countries to formally recognize Ukraine's independence. They were quickly followed by Russia itself, with President Boris Yeltsin acknowledging the new reality. In diplomatic circles, a subtle but powerful shift began as governments started dropping the old, regional term, the Ukraine, and began referring to the new state simply as Ukraine. Armed with this clear mandate from the people, Ukraine's newly elected president, Leonid Kravchuk, had an unbreakable negotiating position. There would be no new union. The Soviet experiment was over. Just 1 week later, on December 8, 1991, Kravchuk met with Russia's Boris Yeltsin and Belarusian leader Stanislav Shushkevich. In a hunting lodge in the Belovezha forest, they signed the accord declaring that the Soviet Union had ceased to exist. The vote of the Ukrainian people had given them the authority to write the superpower's obituary. A little over 2 weeks after that, Gorbachev resigned. The USSR was officially gone. The story of Ukraine's 1991 referendum is a powerful reminder that history is often shaped not by armies, but by the collective will of ordinary people. If you want to discover more stories of nations fighting for their freedom, make sure you subscribe. The collapse of the Soviet Union wasn't the result of a single event. It was a slow implosion caused by economic decay, political rot, and the powerful pull of national identity. Many dominoes had to fall for the empire to crumble. But on December 1st, 1991, the people of Ukraine pushed over the final, decisive domino. Their overwhelming vote for independence was the blow from which the Soviet Union could not recover. It was a clear, peaceful, and democratic choice that made the continued existence of the USSR politically impossible. The image of the Soviet flag coming down is the final frame of the story. But the force that brought it down was the quiet power of millions of ballots cast weeks before in a vote that didn't just create a new nation, but also brought an end to an empire.